idea of
they were in last place.
We have on a
one pick.
The homeless.
And then they decided to go on like a 3-game winning streak, and they went from
Trevor
Lawrence to Zach, because they decided to win
my
games at the
area is
end.
that all kinds of misinformation.
Yeah.
Yeah, but this is like Bentley dance rule, like you can remember it. Like I wasn't even born last time.
Roman Gabriel.
Yeah.
First quarterback I started following the Los Angeles ranked back in the 70s.
Yeah.
So,
When I was,
we've got all this.
I grew up in Texas.
I feel like the majority of our job is dealing with misinformation.
It's literally.
It's more dealing with misinformation than it is working on actual policy.
We're live, by the way, folks. Whatever you talked about is now on YouTube.
This football.
Football. I guess that's all right. So what I wanted to cover first was, is a proposed change that we talked about yesterday with Ben, before Ben gets here. And that's how you deal with failure to comply. And this is the one pager that's in your document. And the Department of Corrections may report a violation of the defendant's electronic monitoring conditions to the prosecutor and the defendant, provided that a defendant's failure to comply with any condition of the program for a reason other than fault on the part of the defendant should not be reportable. To address a reported violation, the prosecutor may initiate a review of conditions, a violation of conditions proceeding, or a contempt proceeding. So what this is basically trying to do, and I wanted to get the Department of Corrections response, is person's on electronic monitoring. All the lights went out, electricity's gone, no cell service. We want to make sure they're not violated because you couldn't find them on the electronic monitoring.
So what I would say is, if we have power outages like that, and we have them now, like we wouldn't violate.
Okay.
What I would be concerned with is having language, and I don't know if that language hits it or not. Sometimes we have self-tampering. So I want to make sure sometimes people don't charge it in, or they try to find ways. There's ways that you can try to fool the electronic monitoring device. You can go on YouTube or whatever, and they'll tell you sometimes, or they won't charge it, or find ways of tampering it. And that's where I'd want to make sure that if an individual is purposely tampering with the device, that it would not, I guess it would still notify the court of the violation. You know, the department's been managing electronic monitoring over a decade now, and the equipment is really good. It's a very competitive market. All the technology is fairly similar. It's just different softwares, and they got it down to a pretty good science with those devices.
And you're okay with a may report a violation?
Yeah, I think that's probably good language. You know, obviously, I think depending on what the violation could be, if someone's late for an appointment, we don't want to waste the court's time for something like that, right? So we have that discretion now with that language.
Okay. So we added something to the effect that,
and I think the language "no fault of their own" would probably work, I'm guessing, because otherwise it's their fault, I guess, would be the way.
Yeah, then we can also say not including the individual tampering.
Yeah.
Yes.
And just a general question about discretion. You know, I mean, there's a range of situations that people can be in. I mean, if somebody is genuinely running 5 minutes late to get to their house just because they got caught up in traffic, compared to somebody who goes out all night in violation of their conditions. I mean, how is the discretion balancing? How does that work out?
Well, it's with pretrial or with home detention, let's say, because that's what we kind of have right now. We use a lot less discretion. We're more black and white. It's supervision. It's not case management. But we're realistic, right? If someone's late or someone's having issues or like we won't just violate for the sake of violation. So that's, you know, kind of how our philosophy is with our department is like we're not looking to violate. And for something with like home detention or what these drafts would be, it's really condition compliance. And so that's really what our staff would be focusing on. Are you following the conditions that were set forth by the court? And then notify the court to have them determine what to do. You know, with furlough, probation, parole, we have a lot more discretion. You know, furlough, we have a lot of discretion on what we can do. So it's just how it's different. Like we don't case manage, we don't look to do risk reduction or it's really just pure supervision of conditions of compliance is what any of the pretrial stuff would be.
Okay.
Senator Norris has a question.
Yes, Senator Norris.
Thank you. Yesterday we spoke about, let's talk about the equipment a little bit there.
Okay.
We spoke about high-tech equipment and so forth. When a power failure or whatever, is this a GPS monitor system or is this something that needs Wi-Fi or
So
can they ever use that excuse for?
It is generally GPS. So that's the standard system is GPS. We are in Vermont, so sometimes cell service does not work everywhere. Basically, if you get a cell signal, the equipment will work. There are also other alternatives that we can use to have landline phones to have a Wi-Fi hotspot, so we can have our equipment done there. So generally, it is done through just like your phone with Google Maps. It's probably this fairly similar technology. I don't know if that kind of answers your question, but it's generally through cellular. The requirements is they have to charge their device like every 2 hours a day to keep it charged.
So I guess to follow up on that question, it's my understanding that DOC has passive.
Correct.
So if in fact if you're aware of power going out or whatever else, is there a mechanism that is used to check on the individual who has this electronic device on them?
I don't know that specific technical issue. So let me just try to kind of rephrase this, make sure I'm hearing what you're asking. So, so the passive system, what that does is the device will send the signal and the system will capture it, but it doesn't notify. So if the power goes out, it's a battery, so we'll be charged for a period of time, so it won't just die immediately. Now, if power is out for multiple days, then we have issues, and we're probably having conversations with the individual about having to find alternate ways of charging the device. So just because power goes out, the signal still works, right? So it's like a cell phone, not power, but the cell phone will still work.
Okay. And my last follow-up question is this, such as Senator Sears mentioned yesterday, I believe we took testimony on this, was my concern would be the home detention. Okay, where they're actually accruing time against, rather than being incarcerated, they're incarcerated in their own homes. In that particular instance, it's my understanding you still use the passive.
Correct.
For home detention, I agree with Senator Sears on that.
So for the department, when we requested the change last year, so we are not a 24 out in probation parole, it's not a 24/7 operations. So when we have active with language like to immediately respond, that really puts a strain on our staff and it puts a strain on our resources because we either have to put on a third shift, like you know, our probation officers kind of work court hours when the court's open, and we have some field supervision officers, but we're not 24/7. We have some weekend days we don't have supervision. So when it's an immediate response with active supervision, the department is going to have to find mechanisms to have 24/7 supervision. And that is either through adding additional staff for additional shifts, it's putting staff on overtime or standby status. And it really does tax, especially small offices, an office of 7 or 8 people, having a 24/7 operation is really taxing on the staff.
But I was told there's only like 6 folks in home detention, and we do have correctional facilities throughout the state of Vermont. You do have control room operators in each one of those correctional facilities, because they fulfill that role. Okay. Is that something that could be placed upon them? I mean, how often is it gonna happen with 6 people, right? Just making a phone call to say,
What, the thing is we have to respond. So we either have to do violations, notify the police, bring people in to go look, do the return. Correctional officers, that's not their training, and B, they can't really leave their post in the facility.
okay, I was referring to the control room operator, not the correctional officer. Working the odds, shall we say. Okay, thank you.
Senator Sheen.
And just kind of follow up on that, actually, you know, with the passive supervision, I mean, you know, there's a response, it's just during business hours, right? So it's not like nothing happens, you know, if somebody's violating at 11 o'clock at night, somebody's probably gonna show up at their door the following day in the afternoon, or the morning, I would imagine.
Well, I think the way that it's currently written now is basically we notify the court. So the way that it is currently written for the responses for home detention and for the pretrial supervision, right, is that the supervising officer, the pretrial supervising officer will notify the court. So having a 24/7 immediate response doesn't really jive with that, because Friday night, there's something's going off, I write a report to the court gets it Monday morning and does something. So having that immediate response, it doesn't kind of fit there, other than the resources as well. A lot of the language in there was about removing us from being the lodging or the enforcement authority, and basically just which is fine. And that's, we're not pushing that one way or the other, but that's kind of how it's set up now.
I just got one quick follow-up.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Where does that notification go? If someone's electronic device fit, where does that go? Does it go to probation, parole?
Yep,
office,
so what we do is, every morning, during work days, is we have staff to go on and review all the electronic monitoring, report outs. And we look for violations, if there's violations, and then we follow up. For something of home detention or for what pretrial, I assume what we would do is once there's a violation and we confirm the violation, we would write an affidavit and notify the court, and I guess the state's attorney with the new language, that, you know, the defendant has violated the conditions of release, and here's our affidavit supporting that, and then it goes to the court for the court to make a determination on how to respond.
How many people are on electronic monitoring roughly?
Oh, Mark had, we have a couple of hundred. So we have two.
Does that include people that are on furlough or other?
Yes, yes. So
How many detainees do you know?
detainees would just be the 5 on home detention.
Just the 5. So you're not using electronic monitoring for people that are in the community on detention.
Right now, the department only has authority for
I believe this bill would give that authority to the
bill would give
department.
the authority to the department at the time.
And that was where the 6 new positions come in, or 7 actually. But the idea is that we would have people who are on detention on electronic monitoring. I don't believe it's the intent to be passive monitoring.
Okay, so, and that's fine. We can make active work. It's going to be expensive because we're going to have to,
Understood.
and it's going to be draining on the staff. Because we'll have to have staff available to respond.
But how expensive is it, the crime that's going on in the communities, the behaviors that we're trying to deal with? If you lock all 200, say there's 200 people and you lock them all up, what's the cost to you in terms of your space? You've only got so many beds, so if you don't do something, you have more people in, and
So what I see is electronic monitoring is a tool. right? And it's a device, and it has an appropriate use, and sometimes it can be misused. How I see this structured out, this will increase individuals getting violated, because once we start looking and searching and having conditions be relayed real time, it will increase violations and reports. And that's fine. I'm just saying what reality may be. If, for people in this room, if we got in trouble and the department director said, we're gonna put an electronic monitoring device on you, and you have to be home by 10 o'clock, most of us would comply with that, because we're dealing with sometimes with individuals with addiction issues that don't respond well to structure, mental health cases, and adding electronic monitoring devices to them, if they're already non-compliant. And I know we saw the list of the number of, there's like 800 people with 5 or more violations or new charges. Electronic monitoring is not going to really work for that population. It will just create more violations, because they're already violating, they're already in a non-compliant atmosphere, until there's an action that will prevent them from doing that, whatever that may be, right?
Well, that does create a mess. Here's the problem. Most people who receive release either on bail or on their own recognizance don't violate conditions of release.
I agree with that.
There's a certain group that does, and then there's that maybe do it once or twice. They come in, they're dealt with by the court or by somebody. And then there's a group that get up there in the high numbers. I don't know if 5 is a high number, but certainly 45 to 60 is a high number. And those are the individuals that the public hears about and the public is very concerned about, I think. That's the group that this bill tries to address. Because the problem, after a lot of testimony for the last 3 months, I believe it's safe to say this committee has determined that it's violations of probation, not the bail laws, particularly the problem. It's the violation of conditions of release that is is the problem. And when you have repeated violations of conditions of release, it makes it look like the system has no teeth. And it makes people feel that they're in a situation, people who are law-abiding citizens feel like they're in a situation where there is no consequences and nobody's held accountable for negative behavior. So,
I would agree with that,
I
Senator.
understand that the department doesn't wish to have this new duty.
It's not necessarily that. The population you were just describing, electronic monitoring will not be affected with that.
Well, then,
It will generate more violations. If someone is completely non-compliant, having a different way of tracking non-compliance is not going to make them compliant. Right?
I don't disagree. So those individuals may have to be incarcerated.
Yes, I'm not disagreeing with that.
However,
the only way to intervene with that behavior.
However, as you said, some people who have electronic monitoring are not going to be violating because they have electronic monitoring, and they might otherwise be.
I think historically what we've seen with our home detention cases, and currently we have 5 really serious aggravated, I think 2 aggravated domestic, 2 attempted murder, and 1 second-degree murder. Very compliant. And I think historically when we've seen cases where the offense was very severe, like in that spectrum, they've been fairly compliant with electronic monitoring and home detention because there's a lot at stake. And they're generally not, a lot of times this is their first entry into the criminal justice system. They're fairly pro-social. They understand that if I violate this, I could go to jail for a really long time. from getting earned time, on home detention. The cases where we see where home detention really doesn't do well are the lower severity individuals that are higher risk and in higher, have higher needs, right? Their addiction issues or mental health issues where that generally doesn't, work. We've had a lot more violations with that population than we have with the more serious, stable, low-risk population.
I think most people would agree. You need appropriate alternatives for various groups of individuals. If you don't have the right alternative, you need to, that's part of the failure rate, right? Not having the proper alternative. But I think in my mind, what's happened is we don't have mechanisms to hold people accountable who are into that group that you just described. So we have draft 2.3. Ben is supposed to be here momentarily. And that's what I was hoping to go through today.
Just an update on that, Ben is wrapping up and upstairs right now, he should be here.
We need to make sure in the future that when we have crossover dates, we lock in the staff, legislative council staff, months ahead. The next time we have crossover will be the end of the session. And usually the problem is we're stuck because the House gets to keep going on. So I believe that if we start to look at the draft, we get to, there aren't many changes from the last section. I think the first one is on page 17. Department may support the program's monitoring operations through grants of financial assistance or contractor services with any public or nonprofit entity that meets the department's requirements. So the equipment could be from a for-profit organization, probably would be. I doubt there's any nonprofit providing equipment for monitoring or retention. But the monitoring operations could be through contract with a public or nonprofit entity. The sheriff's office in Wyndham County, for example.
Mr. Chair, we had testimony yesterday, I think it was, about that and the idea that it might wind up killing the program if we eliminated for-profit from it.
Right.
So I'm wondering if we have reason to believe that's not.
Well, it says operation. It's the operation, not the.
Yeah.
I think Senator Bruce wasn't here when what we heard from DOC is that the issue of the for-profit company is the actual equipment. They need to be able to purchase that from the few companies that make it, but the monitoring could be. So we clarified that what we mean by
Okay.
Public or nonprofit is for the monitoring.
Got it.
Senators.
And for the monitoring, it's my understanding it's the department that does the monitoring. So that would be and correct me if I'm wrong, but that would be the public entity.
Yeah, right. But it doesn't preclude the department from reaching an agreement with New Hampshire to jointly monitor everybody in New Hampshire and Vermont that's on home detention or whatever.
Or to have the Wyndham County Sheriff do it.
Or have a county sheriff do it, or have Massachusetts do it, or whatever.
Well, I think where this comes into play is what is the response from the department going to be, right? So if it's going to be a 24/7 immediate response, then having it from an outside entity is just going to be another phone call to make directly to staff, right? So if we have to respond,
I believe that the 24/7 was struck. I mean, the immediate response was struck. If you read 3 on page 17, top page, excuse me, it's somewhere else it was struck. I got the wrong place. Maybe I should have waited for that.
I think that's on page 16, line 11 of version 2.2.
Oh,
And it's, I don't see it there.
Yeah.
On 2.3, so.
right.
Oh, wait, now it's at the bottom of the page, so it is
Oh, yeah,
still
we
there.
didn't strike with immediate, I thought we had agreed that they would strike immediate response. And it doesn't include immediate response if it's an emergency,
It doesn't require it and everything.
but it could be or couldn't be. It depends on the situation. Good catch. So then the next changes are 20, page 20. Which we just discussed. The defendant is eligible to pre-trial supervision if the person has violated conditions of release pursuant to 7554E or 7559, that was from Judge Zone, has not less than 5 pending court dockets, poses a risk of non-appearance, poses a risk of flight, poses a risk to public safety. So the ad is has not less than 5 pending court dockets. Then on top of page 21, the pretrial supervisors shall notify the prosecutor and the defendant of any violations of program supervision requirements committed by the defendant. On submission of the pretrial supervisor's sworn affidavit by the prosecutor, the court may issue a warrant for the arrest of the defendant and fails to report to the pretrial supervisor, commits multiple violations of supervision requirements, or is suspected of absconding. Any comments?
So, what are you gonna do, Senator Sears, with, on page 16, lines 17 through 19?
Which page?
16,
Oh, you're way back.
I'm way back.
Okay.
Is that deleted, or
Yeah, immediate response was, I think we agreed, not the whole thing.
not the whole thing?
Yeah, it will read, the program shall be a part of an integrated pretrial supervision program and shall provide 24 hours a day, 7-day-a-week electronic monitoring with supervision.
Okay, so just the immediate response.
But striking immediate response, which,
With supervision, meaning it's active rather than passive?
yeah,
Okay.
if, just, the way I see it is, so the person, somebody gets a call from the victim of a domestic violence that this individual has approached them. And then you get the monitoring showing that they're approaching them. Somebody's gonna respond to that. On the other hand, if it's something else, it may not be a response. It may be from law enforcement, not from DOC. Yeah.
Sure, if I may. I think folks in the committee are familiar with the strains of hospital coverage, which the department has worked very hard to ameliorate for our field staff. And I do just want to express concern, as Dale mentioned, the incredible weight this could fall, I think the great burden that this would place on our field staff. That this could, the immediate, so we saw this with the active supervision requirements for home detention.
So the governor really doesn't want to solve the problem.
I cannot.
That's, I mean,
But
I think that's what we're coming down to is the governor wants to talk tough, but he doesn't really want to solve the problem. If the administration can't get it together to solve this problem, that's frustrating to me. And so you take that message any way you want, but we heard loud and clear that part of the problem was bail laws. I believe the governor started, this was his parts of his bill or his bill. But then when it comes down to resources, they don't want to do it. And that's BS, frankly. It's troubling to me to get to this point in the session and, oh no, we can't do this, we can't do that, because, you know, I agree. You know, you need more staff, so we've allocated 7 new positions. If we have to, we can allocate more. This has to go to the House, you know, but I hate to see this governor once again say, you know, we gotta do this, we gotta do that. But then when it comes to putting the resources for the state's attorneys, the courts, Department of Corrections, you name it, they ain't there. We have $17 million. Next week, this committee's gonna take up budgets. We have $17 million in requests for the criminal justice system over what the governor recommended. I'm trying to work with the House, trying to work with Senate appropriations on this issue. And it's very frustrating. And I know you're just the messenger, so I'm trying not to shoot the messenger. But I have to say publicly on the record that it's frustrating to try to deal with this problem in an environment where you think you can do it with no money. Well, then if you're gonna do it the other way, let's put more people in jail. And that's gonna put more stress on your system, because you're gonna have more people out of state at 36,000 a year. And so multiply that times 100, and if you'd rather do that, not you, but, you know, if that's what the desire is, we can do that. And put more people in jail. Simply
I certainly would.
on detention.
It might not, I'm not here to speak to the politics. Just to note that I think the term active supervision is a bit of a misnomer. And perhaps Dale and Mark can speak a little bit more to what that looks like, but a person cuts off their electronic monitoring device. A call will then, we'll have to get notified, they'll go to staff, they'll wake up, they'll respond, they'll call law enforcement. That is not an immediate response.
We took out immediate response.
We did still in the latest draft.
That was a mistake. Ben, we're back on page 16, line 19. And I believe the committee said take out immediate response.
You did.
Which is still in the draft, and I'm just trying to explain to the people from the DOC that it's no longer in the draft.
Yeah, that was
we took it out.
on my part, I apologize.
We took it out.
Did you want just response or?
Yeah, I mean, it's monitoring with supervision, period. So the program should be a part of an integrated pretrial supervision program that should provide 24-hour a day, 7-day a week electronic monitoring and supervision.
So just a question, if there is a violation on off hours, how, just for clarity for myself, so if someone violates on a Saturday, when do you expect the response to occur from the department?
Depending upon the violation, probably Monday. But, I mean, if the violation is they're shooting somebody.
So we will be providing electronic monitoring 24/7. It's on their ankle all the time. We don't take it off on days off, so to speak. So I guess for clarity before, as we're starting to get this in place, like if we could construe that language as 24/7 monitoring without immediate response, it could be follow up on Monday, right? If that's just being
I'm not putting
understanding.
that in the language.
I'm just looking for clarity, so if in the legislation, so to be clear that when this passes and we implement it, that is meeting the legislative intent.
Intent is you use good judgment.
Can I ask a clarifying question about a different part of this? It's in the same section, and it's a question I think for Ben. And so on line 17 in the same section where it says the program shall be part of an integrated pretrial supervision program, does that mean that anyone in the pretrial supervision program has to be on electronic monitoring?
No, it's.
Or that anyone who's on electronic monitoring has to be in the pretrial supervision program?
Neither, because it's not capitalized, it's not referenced, it was sort of used, it was taken from the initial statute, and how it was written.
What does integrated mean then?
Great question.
Yeah, then what are they apart? Like, I guess I'm just sort of confused, given that we're like setting up a pretrial supervision program, it gets a little murky.
You changed the terminology, but it was really just supposed to be part of an integrated program. I mean, that, again, I can't speak to the intent behind the language.
All right, take the damn thing out. Just take it out. They don't want to do it. And they don't want to do it, we'll take it out. And so you did section 5, keep it the way it is with, your little passive, and I'll be a little aggressive, passive aggressive behavior. Take it out. If that satisfies you, makes you happy, but I want an emphasis on home detention. And so, we don't have to change electronic monitoring, you're already doing it, right? Are you doing it for detention populations?
Just the home detention as of now, that's all we have authority
Okay,
for.
so we want detentioners to be eligible for electronic monitoring under the same standards as you've used for non-detentioners.
Okay, that is what we do now with home detention. Home detention is.
Yeah, but you only have 5 people.
On home detention, but we have hundreds on electronic monitoring.
So if we took out the electronic monitoring piece, except for allowing detentioners to be on the current passive system, that would be okay.
Yes. The other system we can do is it just ramps up the resources and the strain on the staff. So currently, how home detention, we use the same supervision method of home detention as we do with our sentence population, as far as how EM is utilized and responded.
Right, but you have serious offenders on home detention. So if you go back to just having home detention passive, the way it is, but allowing people, the judge, to place people in electronic monitoring.
Are you looking at on home detention? I think the way.
No, I'm looking, no,
Okay.
stop mixing the two, please.
Okay.
There's 2 different programs. There's 3 different programs here. One is pretrial supervision.
Yeah.
One is electronic monitoring. And the third one is home detention. They're separate programs. The electronic monitoring, all I'm looking at, and I think we can live with at this point, given the timing, is having electronic monitoring available to detentioners as well as people who are on supervision in the community. But the same rules would apply for electronic monitoring. Home detention would be different. We hope to see an expansion of that. So that as an alternative.
What do you mean by detentioners? The
People who are not on probation or parole or parole.
People who haven't been sentenced.
People on release.
Oh, so the conditions.
Pre-trial, pre-sentence.
People who are not on sentence.
So
You
Senator,
answered my question, because the interchange of home detention and electronic monitoring had me very confused, but you made it very clear what you're trying to do.
so just for clarity's sake, and I think the senator was trying to get at this, so if you're on electronic monitoring, not home detention, conditions of supervision, is that also in the pretrial supervision? Do you have to get one to have the other?
Could be, I think it would be up to the judge or the prosecutor could suggest both. I can see cases where they wouldn't be.
Mhm.
I wouldn't think it's a requirement, but if there's somebody who would benefit from that coordination of services and so forth, yeah. But if it's a DUI, for example, probably wouldn't be, but say it's a domestic violence case and the goal is to keep the person away from the victim, then the electronic monitor, I'm not sure that these services needed. That makes sense. So, Ben, if you want to come down, we were trying to walk through the bill changes. So we just make electronic monitoring the way it is today. Not change it. So on line 17, page 16, you take out that language. And 2, I think.
Just bear with me one.
You'd have to change the previous.
Or actually, yeah. No, I think, yeah, you do have to change.
Page 16. Section 5.
Okay. So you want to remove section 5 altogether or?
No.
No, okay.
No, I think what I'm trying to do is get it back so that it's exactly the same as home detention, as electronic monitoring they're using for about 200 people right now. So they don't have to change their rules. It's just allowing detentioners to be on it. That it's worded properly on line 13 and 14 and 15.
Mhm. So maybe just strike subdivision 2.
I think that would work.
But then we're not establishing a new program.
No, we're just expanding.
Subsection 1 says we
You just say manage.
shall establish.
It is the intent of the system ensuring defense.
See what I'm saying? Line 12
You could change that to
Expand.
operate or.
shall expand, yeah. The current
We're
electronic.
just
monitoring.
expanding the use of the electronic monitoring that's currently available to people who are on furlough, for example, to people that are released on supervision.
So it would read, the Department of Corrections shall expand and manage an electronic monitoring program for the purposes of supervising persons ordered to, and it would read the same. And then to strike subdivision 2.
Yeah, I think so. And then the rest, I mean, if you want to, you can either continue to run it or you can contract with an outside agency.
Can I get some clarity here on what exactly is being changed? Because the changes that are being proposed, will the electronic monitoring program not be applicable to people who are on conditions of release? Is that what's being suggested?
No, it would be.
Okay.
The idea is that it'd be the same program that's available today for people on furlough. That it wouldn't be 24/7. That would seem to be the big concern of the department.
And so I thought we remedied that by removing the immediate response.
I did too, but evidently we didn't.
Okay.
So
I just wanted to make sure.
We can let the House deal with that problem. Anything else on that?
One thing,
Tim?
Mr. Chair, Tim Leaders, Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs. So on page, starting on page 16, the electronic monitoring program. I'm not sure if it's been added in there then, which is why I'm just flagging it, but the ability to have DOC inform the prosecutor, just like a violation of home
So
detention.
that's in a different
Okay.
amendment that we already went over.
Yeah,
it's just that we'll go over again in a few minutes, because we want to make sure that's clear. It's failure to comply, and that's a one
I'm
page.
seeing that on your committee page now.
Okay. Moving right along.
But that's one of the.
That would work.
Yeah, so do you want me to go over that amendment now, or did you go over it?
Well, yeah, I guess it's appropriate to go over it now, since that's the one pager. So the committee discussed this, and one of the things we want to make sure of is that what we're trying to do here is make sure that the defendant isn't responsible for a power outage that shuts off the electronic monitoring, but by the same token, want to make sure the defendant is responsible if the individual is tampering with the device. So, I mean, I don't know how to quite write that, but.
I mean, I think that scenario would be captured by this language, because it's, provided that a defendant's failure to comply with any condition of the program for a reason other than fault on the part of the defendant shall not be reportable. So that would say if they were actively trying to do something to tamper with it, it would be their fault. But if there was just a power outage or technological issue, it wouldn't be attributed to them.
Are you comfortable with that, Tim?
Yeah, the amendment looked good.
Okay, so we don't need, so that amendment would go along with the.
So I can put that into,
Yeah.
the larger document.
Any other comments on that from anybody?
Do you need any insight on the electronic devices themselves?
Huh?
Do you need any insight on the electronic devices?
I don't think so. We've seen an example of.
Each person that goes on now is required.
Could you identify?
Oh, I'm
yourself?
sorry, I'm Mark Judge, I'm a field operations manager with USC, I work for Dale. So, but I do the statewide electronic monitoring. Each person signs an agreement that says they'll do X, Y, and Z, and they include charging and not cancel, stuff like that, so I would suspect they'll continue to sign that when they get a pre-trial supervision.
Can I just ask a quick question? Just my own curiosity about the GPS monitoring. If somebody's power goes out versus them tampering with it and saying, oh, my power went out, but they're fabricating that, how do you make that distinction between, an actual power outage or an actual lack of cell coverage or GPS coverage?
So all of the units have multiple fail-safes, so to speak. I try not to get into too much detail in a public forum about what those are. But it's safe to say that we can go into the system and tell, for instance, how long an individual placed the GPS charger on the unit. And they're required to do 2 hours continuously per day, for instance. And if they don't do that, the unit will go for it will go longer than anticipated, but we can tell what the charge percentage is, how long they charge it. If they don't charge it for that 2 hours per day, then that becomes problematic. That's part of the agreement that says you'll charge it.
Yeah, but if it's charged and the power goes out,
Yeah.
the device is still charged. It's like your cell phone, right? So if you don't charge it fully, power goes out, it will still work until the battery tricks down. So it has a battery pack in the device itself.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, That's helpful, and I think we've seen just in the last year instances of extended power outages that could really impact someone's ability to do that. So does the person take the device off to charge it?
Sorry, I didn't hear that one.
Does the person take the device off to charge it?
Just plug it in.
Yeah, there's a charging cord, just like your phone. It really works just.
So they plug themselves into the wall,
They plug into the wall, they charge, they use everything.
and they're tied to that spot for 2 hours, they can't move.
They should be sitting around eating dinner, watching
Okay.
TV, whatever they do.
Interesting, thanks.
And unfortunately, it's not exactly like your phone that you can set it down and walk away
Right.
from it, but
Sorry for the interruption. Evidently you got something answered. So, moving right along.
So what would now be new subdivision 2 is the third-party contracting, which now reads that the department may support the program's monitoring operations through grants of financial assistance to contracts for services with any public or nonprofit entity that meets the department's requirements. Going into the procedure, nothing changed from yesterday, but do you want me to continue kind of going through
The change.
just from yesterday to today? Okay, so I'll skip over that portion. So in the pretrial supervision section, you'll see on what is page 19, line, well, it's probably a little different for you now because I made the change, but in towards the bottom, the addition of an eligibility requirement for pretrial supervision.
Yeah,
So
it's actually on page 20 of our
here's why, yeah, so, yeah.
line 3.
So now, there was an additional eligibility criteria added, or criterion added, that, a person is eligible if they have not less than 5 pending court dockets, in addition to everything else that was already listed. So that was the addition there. And then if you scroll down further into the compliance and review section, it's kind of reorganized things a little bit. Where I moved the previous subsection down, say that pretrial supervisor shall notify the prosecutor and the defendant of any violation of program supervision's requirements committed by the defendant. Upon submission of the pretrial supervisor's sworn affidavit by the prosecutor, the court may issue a warrant for the arrest of a defendant who fails to report to the pretrial supervisor, commits multiple violations of supervision requirements, or is suspected of absconding. And then the defendant may appear before the court not later than the next business day.
I guess that might be an instance where they cut their device off and no one can find them?
Yeah, it's actually defined in statute.
Oh.
And it's actually kind of a complicated definition. Under 28.722 sub 1.
So, okay, I'm fine with that. I guess.
Yeah, if I recall.
It's kind of strange wording that you're suspected of absconding. Oh, so that's
The question is, how will the department notify the defendant that when they absconded, that they've absconded?
To their attorney, if they have one.
Well, they have to have an attorney to have that, wouldn't they?
I mean, they can be pro se.
That's to allow them to challenge the notification to the defendant.
No, I mean, well, you know, this is part of the larger court process, so at this point, they should have an attorney, but they may not.
But that's what I mean. I think to Dale's question, he's asking if they're the ones who are guilty of it, notifying them of it, but it's to allow them to challenge that they are guilty of it.
Right, and so the way it would kind of work out in reality is that, you know, one of the typical conditions of release is keep your information up to date with the court. So if it's only the defendant and he or she are pro se, they would send notice to that last known contact address, and that would be sufficient in this case.
Or am I getting it right now, Dale, that if they have absconded, there's no way to notify them because they have absconded?
Well, I'll take violations of probation by the if the probationer's with us, they know they're getting violated. And we send the violation to the court, and the court sends it to the attorneys. If they abscond, we still send it to the court. We don't give formal notice to a probationer of a violation. So they know they're getting violated unless we give them a citation, for example. So I'm not sure that language seems a bit odd. That's all, like, it sounds like we would notify them, but if they're having abscondings or they're arrested by, like how would that notification work with the court? Notifying the prosecutors are the ones that would bring the charges. The court would notify the attorneys, so the court kind of does the notification, not necessarily.
The pretrial, I'm sorry, but if you read the language, I think I can understand it. The pretrial supervisor sworn affidavit by the prosecutor, the court may issue.
Right.
So it goes to the prosecutor.
And I can explain how I.
Yeah, the pretrial supervisor sends this thing to the prosecutor, hopefully by email, doesn't have to deliver. And then the sworn affidavit is up to the prosecutor, what they do with it. And then if you go back to I believe, the prosecutor is free to do a variety of things with that.
That's correct. It would basically, like any other criminal charge, we could pursue.
So it's not your responsibility to notify the defendant.
Well, that's what the language says.
No, it doesn't. I don't think it does.
The pretrial supervisor shall notify the prosecutor and the defendant of any violations of program requirements.
Right, well, and the reason why this differs than probationers, because probationers are already under the custody of the department. So it's a little bit different in this circumstance because the department's not a party to the case at this point. And so really what you're doing, and really from like a logical perspective, it's the department who's responsible for supervising, making sure that the person's compliant with their conditions. So the way that this would play out is that they're in violation, you notify them. Granted, that deviates from what happens with probationers, but it's a different question. There's a fairness element here when you're in front of the court. So that provides notice to the prosecutor and the defendant. And so that way, if the prosecutor then decides to enforce a violation, the defendant isn't in the dark as to what the violation was that's being enforced.
Senator?
Ben, I think the question surrounding notice and due process, can you clarify or talk further about, does notice when you're being charged or being sued, does it always have to be handed directly to that person, or can it be provided to
notice?
Yep. And can you go more into that?
I mean, drawing from my memory banks a little bit.
So if there's a last known address that DOC has because the probationer is required to update their address, and notice is provided to that address to somebody who is over 18 and resides at that residence, would that be sufficient notice in this?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Bowski. Are we okay?
Do that.
I mean, if you can't find them and they're gone to New Hampshire, I don't think you can find them.
Yeah, and I mean, and if there's some concern, I mean, I suppose it could be clarified in that subdivision 1 that shall notify, by sending to the last known address or something to that effect. But there's nothing in here that would.
I think it becomes the prosecutor's job to decide what to do. You're just requiring the department to notify the defendant, if, maybe you should say, if possible. Something like that, which would allow, if they don't know where they are, then they can't notify. But it's still up to the prosecutor to, for example, to initiate an arrest warrant for that person who they can't find. And then it's up to, the normal process.
And honestly, what they could do, I mean, is I think there's some other bills floating around right now that have the opportunity to provide
notice via the last known electronic address as well in 2024. So by reasonable means, I could see them sending, here's a copy of the sworn affidavit of the alleged violation. It's been sent to the prosecutor, and the prosecutor may proceed as they deem fit. Something like that, but it doesn't need to be spelled out in statute necessarily.
Right.
Just making contact, trying to make contact, I guess, is what you're trying to.
You made an effort to
Right.
report, and then, you know,
I mean, you could
like I
put
send
in,
emails to people and I never get a response, so
shall use best efforts, reasonable efforts, to notify.
reasonable effort to try to do that helped.
And so, yeah, so then moving on from this portion on to, there were no changes to the revocation to right of bail from yesterday to today. And yeah, there are no other changes to the remaining portions of the bill. Now, granted, we
Can I
did,
go to section 10 for a second?
I was gonna get to section 10, that we kind of
Okay.
went quickly through it yesterday, so it may want to
Well,
be revisited.
what I wanted was a copy of, remember Eric's thing, if we could get copies of that again, because it's coming up in 3 different bills on carrying a firearm or using a firearm. Yeah, and I don't know which bill put my copy in, and I think it's something that we should probably make for all senators, whoever reports this bill. Anyhow, we're at section 10 on page 25. By the way, Ben, while Ben is looking,
Sure.
I'm impressed when somebody sends me an email at 3:13 a.m. with a complete redraft of the bill. And I saw her at 5:30, which I thought was pretty early, but hit her up at 3:13. I assumed the kids were up.
Oh, I hadn't gone to bed yet.
If I'm up at 3:13 in the morning, it's because I haven't gone to bed.
Right. Well, I appreciate that, but hey, it's crossover week, right? This is what we do.
I don't think many people realize what our legislative council does here. And getting emails at 3:13 in the morning. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Not really fine copies for everybody else.
Yeah, well, you could make it.
So I also do have it in, I may have it in email form.
That's okay.
If we can send it to everybody.
All right, so we're in section 10, using a firearm while selling and trafficking a regulated drug.
Yes, and that was changed from prior iterations that used carrying or possessing as well. And then after discussion of use, which I can kind of go through, if you'd like.
No, it's okay.
Just saying S58 with that.
S58 has language that creates that, becomes a,
Pick one of the 3 definitions.
becomes a, for the purposes of bail, it becomes a violent crime. That's an S58. So,
Now I'm confused. So bail can't be to protect public safety, right? Only to mitigate flight risk?
Its sole legitimate purpose is to mitigate flight risk. So if we say that it's considered a violent crime, how does that change bail? So what it could do is that if it's a violent felony, is that it could bring it into the hold without bail statute. Okay. And that's how it can be affected. And yes, I mean, it could, the facts and circumstances of each case, bail conditions that are set are sort of, tailored for each case, so it, you know, I don't know if calling it a violent act in statute would necessarily change, the severity of conditions that would be imposed, because that would be based on the judgment of the judge, given the facts and circumstances, but I think from a legal perspective, it could bump it up to that hold without bail status, and put it to a hearing there.
Okay. I would agree. It's mostly applying the whole without bail context.
Okay.
That's in a different bill.
Yeah.
So, we need a rewrite of this bill, and I don't think you can do it in 10 minutes.
Well, I rewrote most of what was discussed on electronic monitoring in real time, so it may be achieved. I don't know if there were any other changes before I walked in.
I don't think there were. So the electronic monitoring is the major change to go along with the passive system rather than but detention program remains as is, and pretrial supervision is added and other provisions. So are there any comments from anybody in the audience who hasn't already? I don't know if there's any other comments. I think we're pretty well there.
Yeah, I mean, I can clean it up and submit it to editing, so it can be voted upon at your pleasure.
What time tomorrow can we vote on it? You're tied up somewhere?
Today?
You're here tomorrow.
Yes, I am here tomorrow for S-285. So, and I have time before that, or we could work it into that, because that goes right up.
285 is almost ready, right?
Right.
That's about 5 minutes.
And I have an hour to go for it, so.
Right, so we could, yeah.
We could easily put you in at whatever, what time have you got?
Yeah, it's 10:30 to 12 tomorrow is what it's
So
slotted
we
for.
won't, we need time for, did we, what other, we've got S-58?
Yep, so tomorrow, we're starting off 9 o'clock is gonna be S-259 with Mike, finishing up.
That's the climate change.
That's finishing up, what we discussed today. So, and then after that, Michelle's coming in for S-58. She said that that should be pretty quick, and then it would be then for this in 285.
So we should have plenty of time tomorrow. So if there are concerns from the department or from the state attorneys or anybody else, we're happy to hear them between now and tomorrow morning. But I think is there any other thing on this bill?
I'll just add in the proposed language from that separate document and send it to editing.
Yeah. And, is there anything else? I don't think we're ready to vote until we see it on the draft. Is there anybody concerned about the bill?
Not concerned,
Isaac.
The department, I think, still has concerns around the number of staff allocated.
Understood. This is guesswork, because I don't know how many people will be in the program. We're trying to limit them by suggesting that it's, you have to violate conditions of release to be in the program, or be in home detention or electronic. So I have no idea, and we have a thing called budget adjustment, assuming that we were get funding for any of the 7 positions, which are not obviously in the governor's budget. And this committee is going to spend next week and the following week looking at budgets. I suspect we'll get an amount to look at over the governor's recommend, but I can tell you that just from conversations with Representative Squirrel, who does the criminal justice budgets in the House Appropriations Committee, they're at 17 million in requests over the governor's recommend for criminal justice purposes. So we aren't getting all 17 million. There'll probably be a box that we're in that we can used. And I hopefully, part of that box would be positioned, whether it's 7 or 10 or 8. I promise to do my best.
So if I can explain why the 6 is problematic, is we have 12 probation officers.
I understand that.
That serves 14 counties, so with 6, that would leave, roughly half the P&P sites without, supervision.
But you can work in Bennington, Rutland, you can work in Wyndham, Windsor, you can work in other districts that's been done, and you can have telephone monitoring. It doesn't require, if you look at the requirements of the bill in terms of pretrial supervision, it doesn't have to be in-person weekly meetings. The example I'll use is somebody I knew who got arrested in New Jersey for a drug charge, got back to Vermont on bail conditions. And one of the conditions was that she entered into drug treatment, monthly urinalysis and other things, and she's been cooperative, and all she does is once a week call a number, an automated number in New Jersey, that she's compliant, etc. And unless they got a report that she's not compliant, they don't have to do anything. So I'm not sure if everyone would be that time consuming. We don't know, it's an unknown. So I understand the department's concern about the numbers, but I don't know what the level of supervision might be. If we assume for a minute that, and I have, that it's a small number of people committing an awful lot of crimes and an awful lot of violations, that's the group. She's probably already dealing with them because they're probably on probation or something for something else. You probably already got them.
I would assume we probably would have some crossover, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know but all the testimony we received, what were those numbers, Tim? The large, you sent them.
Yeah, so with individuals with 5 or more dockets, it was about 700 individuals as of December 10th. Individuals with 2 or more dockets, it was closer to 4,000.
So the 5 narrowed it down to 700 people as of June 10th.
December 10th.
And so that's one of the reasons for that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and my understanding too is that this legislation isn't saying everyone with 5 or more dockets is gonna go under this program.
No.
It's saying they have, like, it's gonna, each of those criteria is gonna narrow it further and further
And
and
the court
further.
can consider it.
Yes.
Well, so one thing about the criteria though is that they're ORs. So anybody that meets that could, right, so there's a difference between sort of eligibility and then whether they're actually placed in the program. So to be eligible for the program, they have to meet one of these 5 criteria.
Right.
And then the court does the assessment to place them.
Right, but we tried to narrow it down so it's a smaller number than the big number of violations, because the catch and release or revolving door that the governor's legal counsel mentioned in the first meeting, and that a number of law enforcement officers you mentioned, all of us, is what the problem is. It's what the public sees. It is not hundreds and hundreds of people who are out on conditions of release who follow the conditions and don't get in any trouble. It is it's that smaller number, and that's who we're trying to deal with. And if they need to be incarcerated, they need to be incarcerated. I think that's where we're at. So that's why I'm encouraged by the bill, the way it's morphed into more of a zeroing in on giving alternatives to the courts and giving, trying to narrow down to who really is the problem. The other thing that would help, and I plan to bring it up again miscellaneous judiciary bill is a docket for misdemeanors, because without taking care of all these small misdemeanors, you got people that are on conditions of release for 3 years. It's awful hard to stay good for 3 years and not have some minor violation. And, you know, it just, we gotta clear that docket, and obviously, it's a court issue. So, anything else? Happy March.
It's Pie Day.
Go to bed tonight, will you?
Pie
Go to bed on Friday night.
It's 3:14.
Right.
Right.
But shouldn't it have the other number?